That's not how you ride a bike.
Break it, head stem and down to.
Good. One of our guys come off recently. That's going to be a bit of carbon work to fix. Had a bit of an accident this morning, ended up on the tarmac. Guy in front of me came in really quickly, and with my front wheel I clipped his back wheel, so he was fine. I came down and the guy behind me came down on top of me. A little bit on the seat, a bit here. The hanger's bent, so I'm going to have to bring that out. But big scratch out. Brake lever. Dull. But the pedal, the carbon pedal here, completely munched away. Really munched away there. Another pair of pedals. A lot of our bikes and the bits and bobs that go on our bikes are made from that wonderful new material called carbon fibre. By far, the majority of carbon fibre on our bicycles comes from a company called Toray in Japan. Some smaller amounts come from the USA, China, France and Italy. Now, whilst we may not have a part in the primary production of carbon fibre itself, we do, however, handle the final product. For instance, your fork steer, when it comes new, you want to fit your handlebars put in the right position, so you'll need to cut the fork steerer. The other thing, you might have a bottom bracket and you want to put it in your bottom bracket shell down here on your frame, and you find the cup is too tight in the shell, so you'll need to mill out the hole a little bit to make the cup fit nice and snug. Or maybe your seat post doesn't go in very well, it's snagging on a few burrs inside your frame, or maybe on the seat post itself. So you'll need to file a little bit inside there or on the seat post so that it goes up and down properly. Now, while you're admiring the finish and the fine quality craftsmanship that you put into your carbon product, how aware were you at the time of cutting and sanding of the fine dust particles that have become airborne in your vicinity? Now, you might be thinking, well, I've been cutting and sanding products for many, many years, never worry about the dust particles and never had a problem. And that may be true. However, what if you're working with materials in the boating industry? Fiberglass. Well, that changes things, doesn't it? Yes, they wear masks and glasses and all sorts of protective gear while they're cutting and sanding it. However, what if we were to mention something like asbestos? Now that rings alarm bells, doesn't it? Very dangerous stuff. Now what we're going to do with this carbon fibre here, I'm going to use a hacksaw, which we normally use for cutting into carbon fibre. I'm going to hack a little bit away and get some of the dust particles from it. And I'm also going to use some wet and dry paper on the dry side and get some particles from that. And then we're going to have a look at those particles under a microscope and see what carbon fibre particles are really all about. Filing the edge of the cut-off piece of fork steerer so the particles fall onto a sheet of paper. Funnel those particles onto a glass slide. A couple of dobs of super glue in the corners and another clear slide on top. That way it will stop any of the particles from blowing away. And labelling it filings. Then repeating that process for emery paper, both 400 and 1000 grit, and for hacksaw blades, both 24 and 32 teeth per inch. So we've got two settings on this microscope, 200 times magnification or 2000 times. Let's have a look. So this is from our hacksaw blade, 24 TPI, and you can see some grey to black blobby bits and also some hairy bits. These hairy bits are carbon fibre splinters, and the black blobs are lots of very short splinters of carbon held together by resin or an epoxy. And here you can see a single long splinter of carbon fibre. Refocus, take another picture, and you can see that splinter is a lot clearer. The diameter of that carbon splinter is between 5 to 10 micrometers. To keep that in perspective, human hair on average is 50 micrometers. Moving on to our next hacksaw blade, 32 teeth per inch, 200 times magnification, and you can see these blobs are slightly smaller than with the 24 TPI. With 2000 magnification, you can see one of these blobs, or we'll call them clusters. A splinter sticking out the side is shorter than with the 24 teeth per inch hacksaw blade. Another slide, the same magnification. These two clusters here have splinters also shorter. This makes sense because the cut is finer than the 24 TPI. Over to the wet and dry emery 400 grit, and you can see the silicon carbide or corundite, which is the abrasive composite which comes off the emery as you sand the carbon fibre. Difficult to detect any carbon splinters in this picture, but we'll go over to this picture, zoom in, and you can definitely see there they are, carbon splinters. And at 2000 magnification we can see a few splinters in this picture. 1000 grit emery and the splinters are almost undetectable. It's because the abrasion is so fine. Over to a different picture, different cluster, there you can see sticking out there some carbon splinters. 2000 magnification and we can see a few splinters sticking out of the clusters there and one splinter on its own. The filings, can't see any carbon fibre splinters, even zooming in with another picture, still can't see any. However, with the 2000 magnification we can definitely see the carbon splinters, but they're well within the clusters. Now let's take this cut off piece of carbon steerer that we hacksawed off, and of course it's raw in the end. We haven't sanded it or filed it or anything. So I'm going to touch my finger on it, just touch my finger, and now I'll put the finger under the microscope and have a look. As you can see very clearly, there's carbon splinters on my finger. A few different shots, so it's showing that the carbon splinters come off of exposed carbon material very easily. Now I'm going to wash my finger with just plain water under the tap, and then we'll have a look again. So washing with plain water, sort of got a little bit off, but most of it is still on my finger. So now let's try it with soap and water. So there we go, it's washed away some of the larger splinters but left some of the smaller ones. Seems these carbon splinters are very stubborn. So that got a little bit more off, however there's still some splinters on my skin. One saving grace we have is that we shed our skin anyhow, so that will help in the long run. So what are we getting at? Carbon fibres, really, just by touching it or rubbing your finger on it, is easily shedding the fibres, those splinters, onto the skin. Now what about on the hacksaw blade itself? Surely there's some on the hacksaw blade. What about on the file? What about on your wet and dry emery paper? As you touch it, maybe you don't have gloves on, so you put your tools away. You might give them a bit of a blow, a bit of a brush. However, there'll still be some carbon fibres on there. What about the clothes that you wear? Even though you're wearing your long sleeve, there's probably some carbon fibre splinters in your clothes as well. So it'd be a good idea once you've finished whatever you're doing with your carbon fibre cutting, sanding and that, is to wash your clothes as well. It just seems to be sticking to everything it can. Let's also have a look at this surface here that we've hacksawed off under the microscope. So there's definitely carbon fibre splinters sticking out of the edges of our steerer tube. Now you could just leave that as it is, put the bike together and ride off into the sunset, and you'll probably never have any safety issues whatsoever. However, those carbon fibre splinters are not going anywhere. They're going to stay there forever and ever. If there ever comes a time when you need to take your stem off, perhaps to add or subtract a spacer or two, those carbon splinters are still there and they'll likely get onto your skin. Once we've filed it, that seemed to make a big difference. Now you can't see any big splinters sticking out, just very, very small ones. And also, once we've sanded it with the 400 and then the 1000 emery paper. Well, now the edges are very, very smooth. The facing edge also being smoothed off, now we can see air pockets and resin-rich patches. If you were to touch the surface with your skin, the splinters would be very, very small. Now, choosing a clean finger, let's rub it on the outside of the carbon fibre here where we haven't cut or sanded. It's a bit like just on here, on the steerer, same thing. And have a look at that under the microscope. So clean and no carbon fibre splinters to be seen. The reason is because when we rub here, this has already encapsulated the carbon fibre in a resin. Same here on the frame, it's encapsulated in not just resin, but also paint on top of that. So there's no chance of just rubbing your fingers on a carbon fibre surface which has been coated or sealed and getting any carbon fibre on you. So it's only the exposed carbon fibre areas that you can get the splinters from. So when you're cutting or sanding the carbon fibre, leaving an exposed area, it'd be a good thing to seal it off if you can, either with resin, super glue is a good way of sealing it, or even nail polish. That way it's sealed, encapsulates the carbon fibre, and there's very little chance of carbon fibres coming off on you. So what precautions should you take when dealing with carbon fibre? If you're cutting and sanding every day the carbon products, then you will already have some safety precautions in place. However, if like the majority of us, you're doing it every now and again, not all the time, then you just got to be reasonable. And one of the best steps you can take is to reduce the amount of dust. Then you're one step ahead. And one of the best ways you can reduce that dust is simply a spray bottle of water. Spray it around the area and maybe on the wet and dry paper that you're using, the emery paper, and as you work, it'll keep the dust right down. Another thing is to have one of these. Remember these from COVID, when we had COVID all the time? A mask. Oops, not that. This one's just a very simple one. You can get much better ones from the painter's shop. They sell some nice proper ones. So it all depends. If you want to use one of them, they're very handy. If you haven't got one of them handy, good old bandana from cycling, one of the bandanas you put on, then you can put that over as well. Put it around your neck and just up over your nose and your mouth, a bandana. Next would be your eyes. You don't need full all-round goggles, just something simple like this to stop any direct debris coming into your eyes. Then of course gloves. Gloves are very handy. That way you keep it off your skin directly. If you've ever tried to wash carbon fibre off your skin, you know it doesn't come off very easily. You have to actually foam it up a fair bit, say dishwashing liquid or some soap, and give your hands 2 washes at least to get it out. It's very, very fine dust. Another way of reducing dust is the vacuum cleaner. You can put the unit out of the way, even outside. If you're going to do your work inside, put the vacuum cleaner outside a door, close the door. That way the dust, if anything, if it goes through the filter, it can go out into the environment outside, not inside in a closed environment. Put the nozzle next to where you're working and that will suck the dust away, pretty much most of it. So good old vacuum cleaner. If you've got a fume extractor, well, you know all about them, you'll know how to use them. That's probably a bit overboard for what you and I are doing anyhow. That's another option, just like a fancy vacuum cleaner. Last but not least, long sleeve clothing, preferably pants, not shorts, and some long sleeves like this. Don't have to go overboard, don't have to put on a full chem suit to keep it away. Just be reasonable. Usually you'll find if you get it on your arms, some of the dust, and you get it in the crease of your arms, you'll feel it, it'll feel itchy. And if you have a shower, make sure you lather up to get rid of that carbon fibre dust. But the chances are, on a small scale, we cut and sand our carbon fibre products, you won't have to worry about that. So it's all about just being reasonable with the precautions. Here's a couple of suggestions when cutting your fork stirrer. Put some good quality tape around where you're going to make the cut. Measure, this is just for demonstration purposes, put the line on the tape so that you cut through the tape and the stirrer at the same time. Then spray water around the whole area and on the hacksaw blade both sides. This will help reduce the dust. Remove the tape and you should have a nice clean edge which doesn't require much finishing. When you're cutting your carbon fibre with your handsaw, keep in mind the blade. There are different sorts of blades you can use. The basic one, 24 TPI or teeth per inch, will give you a very quick cut, but it'll leave a rough edge, so you'll have to smooth it all off. So that's 24. Even better is if you use 32. So this one's got a 32 in it. There's more teeth per inch, 32 TPI. So that's the ideal one. Now, even better is if you want to use one of these. This is a tungsten carbide blade or a tile cutting blade. Sometimes they call them diamond blades as well. So these are much better, especially designed for cutting things like carbon fibre. It'll cut quicker, smoother, and leave a cleaner and more precise cut. This one's a Park Tool And when you're sanding, don't use sandpaper because the backing is paper, and when you go around inside your bottom bracket or around your fork steerer, it's around a small circle, then you're going to find it splits, cracks and tears really easy. Use emery paper. Wet and dry emery paper is the best. The backing's a lot stronger, and also you can wet it so that it reduces dust as you work. Now, as for the grades, personally I use between 200 to 400 to start with, and then finish off with about 800 to 1000 grade. When sanding, for instance, a bottom bracket shell here, wet the area again, just like you did with the fork steerer. Then wet your wet and dry emery paper, sand in the appropriate spots, then measure, then repeat that process over and over until the cup fits in that bottom bracket shell nice and snug. For filing, if you're going to do any filing at all, then a fairly fine metal file is good enough. Another carbon fibre job you might find yourself doing, I quite often end up having to do a job every now and again, for this is the hole in the handlebar is quite often too small for the cable that you want to go put in, or there's a carbon fibre snag in there that needs to be filed away. So use a round file, put it in a hole at the appropriate angle and back and forth a couple of times, and then try the cable again. If it's not quite in there, a little bit more filing. Don't file too much away, only what's necessary so that you can get your cable in nicely and it slips through. Don't go filing too much away. You want to leave as much carbon fibre on your handlebars as you possibly can. Now, the carbon fibre itself is mostly made from carbon or graphite, and it's non-biodegradable. It's also non-photodegradable. However, it's non-toxic. Now, just because carbon is non-toxic, does that mean it's okay to get all over your skin and inhale it into your lungs? Doesn't matter about the dust. Well, that's what I did this video for you to make up your own decision. It's your health and you need to look after it. Now, this is not scaremongering into anti-carbon fibre. Don't use carbon fibre products. No, not saying that. However, if you really want to see it for yourself, get a strong magnifying glass or even one of these microscopes. Have a look at some of the carbon bits you've cut up and see it for yourself. The other part that our carbon fibre is made up from is, of course, the resin. Now, the resin is photodegradable, but it takes a long time to degrade. Now, it's not necessarily the resin in the dust that's going to affect you too much. It's when you're cutting it with a high-speed cutting wheel that the fumes, it can get very, very hot and burn and emit some fumes. And that fumes are what you need to guard yourself against. So if you are using a cutting wheel and long-term cutting large bits of carbon fibre, then be aware of the fumes from the resin. You need to mask up properly. So hopefully this video has been a little bit helpful, a bit of an insight into seeing what happens when we cut and sand our carbon fibre products and some of the precautions that we can take to protect our health. A couple of months later and our injured rider is back. He's on his crashed bike. It's now all stitched back together. It's one of the things you can do with carbon fibre. We're riding along, we heard this. Are you from Galway?
No, I am. Yeah, I live here now.
Oh, you live here? Oh, nice.
48.2 prime. Yeah, the old aerodynamics there.
It's amazing.